Beds, many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
To Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're first going to start diving into parts of this Russia investigation, things that are going on within the Republican Party and the government at whole, and how politics are kind of playing out in all of this. So we're going to really get into that. And I have quite a few articles here from CNN, Wall Street Journal, covering some of what's kind of unraveling, and some of these publications even posted this, but you'll also see their typical slant on it. Towards the end of the broadcast, I kind of want to get into the Liberty movement, being, around the 10-year anniversary of, the Ron Paul movement, basically. And I'll really get into that, but we're going to go ahead and dive into a Ron Paul Liberty report. We'll go ahead and get that kicked off right now.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing fine. Our program today is going to be a little bit different. We spend a lot of time talking about foreign policy, obviously, and a lot of time on economic policy and big spending and things. But I would put this into the category more politics, but I can't talk about politics without talking about the big picture as well, about what policy is all about. But I want to go over a little bit and get your opinion, and we'll discuss a little bit about Jeff Flake's well-covered speech yesterday. He had a lot of attention when he gave his speech, which I think was pretty unusual because it wasn't in the Senate chamber, but it was a special conference. And sometimes you can go to your Republican conference or the Democratic conference, but it was bipartisan, all the senators and Republican and Democrats there. And he gives this significant speech that got unbelievable coverage. And the reason I think there was this tremendous coverage is he was speaking for a lot of people, very frustrated and very angry, and that is the Republican establishment, the old line, typical Republicans, and also a Democrat just for partisan reasons. So he had a pretty big audience, and this big coverage. But the whole thing is what did it do, and what was the real reason why he was upset? Was it because he understood where the real problems were? Or maybe it's political. Maybe it's his ratings in Arizona. Who knows exactly what motivated him? But, basically, from my viewpoint, he was saying things that weren't outrageous, but the conflict that it seemed to symbolize, I think, is outrageous and has a lot of significance about where we are. In many ways, I think what we're witnessing is the cracking apart and the breaking apart of the empire. And they're not addressing that. They think this is just a personality. It's all Trump's fault, or it's all Schumer's fault. And, it's Democrats versus Republicans. So I think they're missing the whole thing. I think there's a bigger story here, and that is we're at an impasse. Washington is at an impasse, and whose fault is it is the question. And I guess the speech yesterday was a suggestion of who should be blamed.
Yeah, and it was a 17-minute speech. Essentially, it was an announcement that he would not be running for re-election next year. He would leave the Senate when his term expired at the beginning of 2019. And, of course, you're right. It got a lot of cable coverage. The cable loved it. CNN loved it. But it was because it was very critical of the president. And it shouldn't be a surprise that the mainstream media loved it and amplified it. It wasn't because of the issues. It was because they've been, I think, 92% negative coverage of President Trump. So they love it because it's Trump bashing. It's not because there were some principles or some issues that he brought up that were significant.
Yeah, and I think when we get ourselves into trouble financially and a foreign policy that is failing and nobody wants to admit the fundamental flaws, whether it's the Federal Reserve and all, they have to go. And it becomes partisan. The partisanship is real, but the philosophy is usually not much different. They go along to get along, and they all spend the money. But when there's an impasse and things aren't working well and they can't just add things to the budget and make everybody happy, I think this is a setting for bringing the worst out in people, the worst out in politicians, the worst out in people who are there for power. And it brings out, grating personalities at times. And you could argue the case that this certainly is an accusation and sometimes justly made about the president. He seems to take things on and, is really gruff with people. And also, I think character traits come out, too. And sometimes they're subtle and appear to be polite, but they're really not. And they're really at each other's throats, but I think for the wrong reasons. I think they're right now, when you see this episode, everybody's looking in all the wrong places because I think it's a big issue. I think we're in a similar situation like the Soviet system was in the late 1980s, that something big was happening and hardly anybody knew it. Nobody said, in 1989, in 1990, the Soviet system is going to be gone. Nobody said that. But there's something going on here. And when I see this type of animosity and then, the struggle on taxes and the struggle over socialized medicine and the struggle over the spending and most likely, they're not going to have any solution. I keep hoping, maybe something good would come if they would just release a little bit of freedom for our medical care system, or a little bit of restraint on the Federal Reserve, or a little bit of change in the foreign policy. But it doesn't seem to happen. Everybody is locked in, and I think they're locked in because philosophically they're closer together than they want to admit.
Yeah, and Senator Flake said there are more important things than a political career, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
I think you've discovered that. But you're right. When it comes down to, the speech was about style, and I don't think there's much in there that you disagree with in that respect. But his big complaint was on style, but he didn't talk a lot about policy. He talked about the tone. And I was just looking at an article that said he voted in favor of the Trump position 91.7%. So in terms of the actual policies, doesn't seem that opposed. Where he voted against the Trump position has been in favor of even more hawkishness, believe it or not. He voted on June 14th for Russian sanctions. President Trump didn't want the Senate to vote yes on that. July 27th for North Korea, Russia, and Iran sanctions, some more sanctions. The president didn't want that for whatever reason. And he also, and this is a pretty bad thing, I think, he voted to kill Rand's amendment to sunset the authorization for use of military force.
And that, of course, is a big issue. And the military and its relationship to this administration and to Congress seems to be morphing into something different than what we've put up with in the last many decades. And what I'm thinking about is how many generals are involved.
Yeah.
And some people say, well, the generals that we worry about being very aggressive, and we should, are actually seen right now as trying to calm the president down, because the president tends to speak off the cuff and rather gruff and says things that are very confrontational and has significance for world diplomacy. And the generals are supposed to be there now, not to urge him on. It's almost at times when they're saying, hey, back off. It was said that the generals tried to calm him down a little bit about going after Iran and stopping that, reversing that agreement. So it is interesting, but still, I'm not comfortable with that much military involvement in the executive branch, because we know how much they're involved as lobbyists in the military-industrial complex. They run the show, and the spending is there, and it continues. So the military is a big factor, but it looks to me like because of the president's style, he sort of puts a monkey wrench in this, and nobody knows where they're coming from. And in some ways, people have argued. We've heard some libertarians argue, well, he's just in there stirring the pot, and that's good. But it's also dangerous, and I'd like to philosophically stir the pot so that we can think about the alternatives, because I think his pot is going to boil over, and we'll have to have something else. And that's why for years I've emphasized spending, debt, Federal Reserve, monetizing debt, the foreign policy, and everything that we talk about, because we will get to this point where it's not going to be solved by these people in Washington. I mean, and a grandstand announcement that I can't stand. In a way, I can't stand this president. I'm getting out of here because he's so rude to everybody. That's not going to work either. So I still think the solution has to come when we concentrate and explain what we believe in. I frequently use the term "we're all Keynesians now," which Nixon said, but the better term is we're all interventionists now, and that's essentially what Washington is run by. Militarily, foreign policy, monetary policy, the whole works. And, of course, when intervention fails, because the empire will fail, and I think that's what this is symbolic of, then we better have our plans laid out on what kind of a system do we want. What should the role of government be? We have to ask some of the fundamental questions that the founders asked, many, many years ago, which we generally have ignored.
Yeah, and I think, the problem with, you talk about the generals, the problem with the generals being so involved is not because they want war first. That's not really the issue. That's, as you point out, they've in many ways, they've been a moderating force on Trump's impulses. But I think the objection to the generals being so involved in so many sectors, particularly of foreign policy and homeland security, is because their career, by the nature of their career, they have limited perspective. They've come up learning how to fight and win wars. That's not doesn't necessarily serve you well when you're looking at the broader issues of foreign policy. But the one thing about, I hate to bring up numbers, but the one thing about Flake's speech, and as we pointed out, not much we disagree with it in terms of tone, but I think it's also the product of the changing tone, the changing perspectives of the American voter. And this really is the core of the Trump phenomenon, despite the positions he's taken that we disagree with. He understood very well the frustration of the American voter with the status quo, the frustration with the foreign policy that has been going regardless of who was in power, and he tapped into that very well. And I think that may be what someone like Kelly Ward is doing, regardless of her positions. She's tapping into the frustration, and that's why he's got 18% job approval rate, 62% of the voters disapprove of him, and in the third quarter, he raised $1.1 million to Kelly Ward 700,000, which that's pretty close to closing the gap. And he had a lot of high-powered people coming to help him raise money.
Yeah, well, I think Trump tapped into it, and that's part of what's going on now. And you talk about the people, the way they're resentful of Washington. I think most people are concerned about economic policy, basically. Yeah, there's a lot of people that are on the dole and all that mess. But basically, I think the instinct is, you give me a good job and I'll work and I'll be a happy person. But I think it is the division of wealth in this country now. The wealthy are getting wealthier, the poor are getting poorer. Half the people are struggling to make a living. Their standard of living is going down. The cost of living goes up more than the government says. Their real wages do not go up, which is a consequence of monetary policy and spending policy. That's really where the problem is. And Trump and others tap into this, and because the people are unhappy. And I understand that, and I think that's fine to tap in to where the problem is. But what I'm interested in is, how did these problems come about? Why is half of the people getting poorer right now? And they don't talk about interventionism in economics and the Federal Reserve and debt and monetizing debt and too many regulations. They do talk about the regulations and taxes, but it's more than that. They can't tinker with the tax code and reduce the number of pages, which they never do, or we're going to reduce the tax code. No, it has to do with a philosophic economic system that we've been putting up with since the Depression, and it keeps getting worse, and it's coming to an end, and the people are very angry and upset, but I think they're spinning their wheels when we look at this superficially, because it goes into everything, this whole thing of the problem and the anger over the election, and it turned out that Hillary, I understand, lost that election and probably lost it on her own, but it was the Russians' fault.
Oh, yeah.
And so even the Republicans were happy with having, we have to make sure the Russians didn't influence the election, so we're good citizens. So they get a special prosecutor. Now they can't trust, and now they're coming up with evidence that Hillary might have been more involved with the Russians than Trump was. And so they're out there doing that now. And I think the hilarious thing now, and people who want this don't think it's hilarious, but they get Mueller up as a special prosecutor, and maybe he isn't a saint, and it looks like he might have some biases, but now they're saying, well, this stuff is churning up. Of course, it should have been noticed a while ago. It's churning up that Hillary might be involved with corruption. So they want another special prosecutor. So they want a special prosecutor to check on the other special prosecutor to make sure that he's doing his job, essentially what they're saying. So that to me gets so silly, about what's going on. Then who's going to check on the next prosecutor? We'll order up another one.
It reminds me of a Nikolai Gogol play or something. but the real issues, as we've said over and over, have been ignored. The Democrats want to say it was the Russians and the white supremacists that got Trump elected. The mainline Republicans are happy blaming it on the Russians because they've had this attitude that you've got to have a bad guy overseas, because also it fuels the military-industrial complex. So everyone is served by it except the issue of the actual politics, or the actual policies, the actual philosophical guidelines that we follow, and they've both given that up. That's one of the reasons, a big struggle on the left is the fact that there's a huge faction on the left that are so obsessed with fighting Trump on the Russia thing that they're not interested at all in a broad coalition against war. We talked about it yesterday. Right. They're not interested in talking to us because obviously we're not in favor of the other things, so we must be the red-brown coalition or fascist or what have you. So this is the real trouble, and very few are paying attention to it.
And, of course, it's well known, the first casualty of war is truth. And the bigger the government is, the larger the empire, the greater is the attack on telling the truth. And truth can actually become treasonous. So the person who reveals what's going on as a whistleblower, they're in bigger trouble than the people who are breaking the law and doing the killing and all the illegal things. And so much of that is going on now, too. And as bad as it is, as many lies as that we hear, there's a shift in that. And I think that's part of this frustration we talked about. The people are upset and they want changes because they want the truth. And they don't believe the government. They don't believe these commissions. They look into things, and the commission is supposed to finally settle it and tell us what really went on. But there's no reason to have faith and confidence in that. That we're going to hear the truth, and that's what I thought was the case in Washington. Briefings. I figure they're not going to reveal to us the exact truth.
Well, what the pull quote from Senator Flake's speech is "Silence can equal complicity." And that is a great line. Of course, the mainstream media views that as the best anti-Trump line ever. But I think we can adopt that as our motto, too. And that's why we refuse to be silent. We refuse to be complicit in what Washington is doing. And we're outside the gates, pounding on them for what they're doing. But I do, on that same line, I would like to remind our viewers that we are still, through the month of October, offering Dr. Paul's latest book, The Revolution at 10 Years, 10 Years of the Ron Paul Revolution, as a special gift to those who make a donation, a tax-deductible donation to the Ron Paul Institute. And Dr. Paul, we had a new couple of boxes of books. We had such a big response that we ran out of books. I had to send out emails to everyone saying it's going to be a little bit of a delay. We ran out of books, huge response. We got a couple boxes today, so I'm happy to say we're going to be able to send those out tomorrow.
That's good, because you could be in trouble if we run out of books. That's your job. Make sure we have them.
I know.
But I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today for the Liberty Report. And I think it is a very important subject to understand what's happening, who to blame, and who's at fault. But to be bombastic and accusatory is not the way it's done. I think disagreeing with an attempt to not be disagreeable, I think, is a pretty good rule. And sticking with a principle and trying to convey to others to change their minds. I know some people will never change their mind, but I still think attitude is good. I think you win over more with that type of an approach rather than trying to be more outspoken than the other person and more accusatory. But that's what's going on in Washington, and that's why, in spite of my argument that there's a lot of bipartisanship up there on the issues, there's a lot of partisanship now fighting over the crumbs that are being left. But it also is an opportunity for us to present the case for peace and liberty, and that is what we're supposed to be doing here, and that we try to do every single day is to reveal the best possible revelation of the truth and what's going on in this country, whether it's foreign policy, economic policy, or the politics of Washington. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. And we'll touch on the 10-year anniversary and all that. We'll kind of touch on that because I want to get into the liberty movement, the Ron Paul movement, Ron Paul Revolution. But let's go ahead and dive into a few articles here I have. The first one, Republicans spoil for a fight over Russia probe budget. And this is kind of important. Robert Mueller was the person that was in charge when they started investigating Uranium One, which the deal was made under Hillary's watch, which their foundation and Bill got paid crazy amount of money. Bill Clinton made a speech in Russia and got paid like $500,000 or something. And then, millions of dollars into their foundation. And Mueller was in charge when that investigation began, and Comey was in charge of the investigation when it ended in 2015. So pretty important, but Republicans spoil for a fight over Russia probe budget. I think this is one way they're going to try to go after Mueller without just removing him, having Donald Trump remove him. Because again, I said from the beginning, I really felt like there was something kind of weird about this, and it was a witch hunt. And with this whole uranium deal, there's a lot coming out about this. But Republicans trying to hobble Robert Mueller's sprawling probe into President Donald Trump and Russia matters are about to get a new weapon, the special counsel's budget. Lawmakers haven't yet seen the Russia investigators' first spending report, which must go through a Justice Department review before it being made public, but they're already setting up a fight over how much the probe is costing taxpayers and the fact that there's no end in sight. quote, for them to say to us, vote for an open-ended appropriation into a Mueller witch hunt, I think you'll see significant objection there. Representative Steve King, Republican from Iowa, told Politico. Mueller's public budget is expected to contain only top-line figures covering broad categories like staff salaries, travel, outside contracts, supplies, and equipment. But money will become a recurring fight as the investigation drags on because Mueller is required to produce public expense reports every 6 months, giving opponents repeated opportunities to paint him in a negative light. Partisan complaint about the expense that pile up during lengthy Washington investigations, a familiar ritual as President Bill Clinton faced impeachment in the House in 1998. Representative John Conyers, Democrat from Michigan, called Whitewater Independent Counsel Kenneth Starr a federal paid sex policeman spending millions of dollars to trap an unfaithful spouse. Outcry over spending of taxpayer money also cropped up during the Iran-Contra investigation, whose outlays ultimately exceeded 47 million. Taxpayers of this country should be absolutely up in arms about it. Then Senator Steve Sims, Republican from Idaho, said during his CNN appearance in '92, 6 years into that probe. You can read the rest of that at Politico.com. That one's titled Republicans Spoil for a Fight Over Russia Probe Budget. And I really think that's where they're going to try to go after the Mueller investigation, which it's shown to be open-ended, where he's basically looking for crimes anywhere tied to anyone closely associated or loosely associated with the Trump campaign, and trying to get them in tight spots to maybe, give up a name or give up information, and even if there isn't, maybe be willing to say there is so that they'll be left alone. That's what that seems to me. CNN Politics exclusive in the Hill interviews, top Dems denied knowledge of payment to firm behind Trump dossier. Another thing that's coming out about Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta, and former Democratic National Committee chairwoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, both privately denied to congressional Russian investigators that they had any knowledge about an arrangement to pay for opposition research on President Donald Trump. These sources familiar with the matter told CNN. Of course they're going to say, no, we have no knowledge. Don't know what you're talking about. The interviews happened before this week's disclosure that the Clinton campaign and DNC paid for the research. Senate investigators may seek to further question the two top Democrats and dig deeper on the origins of the so-called Trump dossier. One of the sources briefed on the matter said their remarks to congressional investigators raised the stakes in their assertion that they knew nothing about the funding because it's against the law to make false statements to Congress. The White House has seized on the funding disclosures to discredit the ongoing investigations into potential collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. That one from CNN. And I have here out of Wall Street Journal, the coming Russia bombshells. A judge may order Fusion GPS to give White House investigators its bank records. The confirmation this week that Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee paid an opposition research firm for a dossier on Donald Trump is bombshell news. More bombshell are to come. The Fusion GPS saga isn't over. The Clinton DNC funding is but a first glimpse into the shady election doings concealed within that APA research firm's walls. We know now where Fusion got some of its cash, but the next question is how the firm used it. With who did it work beyond former British spy Christopher Steele? Whom did it pay who else was paying it. The answers are in Fusion's bank records. Fusion has doggedly refused to divulge the names of its clients for months now, despite extraordinary pressure. So why did the firm suddenly insist that middleman law firm Perkins Co. release Fusion from confidentiality agreements and spill the beans on who hired it? Because there's something Fusion cares about keeping secret even more than the Clinton DNC news, and that something is those bank records. The release of the client names was a last-ditch effort to appease the House Intelligence Committee, which issued subpoenas for Fusion's bank and was close to obtaining records until Fusion filed suit last week. The release was also likely aimed at currying favor with the court, given Fusion's otherwise weak legal case. The judge could rule as early as Friday morning. So we'll see how far that goes. Another one from Wall Street Journal. Pressure builds on Venezuela. Big payments due this week. We'll get into that here in a minute. But when we look at everything going on, it kind of almost goes back to that, same saying, the person accusing is usually the one that did it. Well, that's definitely not always true, but in this case, it's seeming to play true. When you start looking at the uranium one deal and all this, it's really looking pretty shady for the DNC. Wasserman Schultz, which she's just had to, kind of fight with this whole thing about the IT person she had working for her and the DNC and a lot of Democratic Congress people. When you look at this, it looks like maybe the tables have finally turned, but we're going to have to, again, see how this plays out. Now, I want to get into this pressure builds on Venezuela with big payments due this week. We'll get into that. I want to play a clip here, though, kind of covering the collapse of Venezuela and the aftermath. It's a short clip from Stefan Molyneux, so let me go ahead and play this.
Don't hear a lot these days about Venezuela. It is one of the characteristics of a sociopath or a psychopath that they do not seem to experience any moral guilt or doubt based upon the evils or the evil results of their actions. And all of the people who were very keen in 98 and afterwards about Hugo Chavez and what a wonderful spirit and freedom and revolutionary fervor he was going to bring to Venezuela, they have all gone silent as the inevitable results of socialism, of distortion of the market, of the destruction of price signals, which are the only way to efficiently allocate resources. All of this has come to pass. It's been a long time coming in Venezuela. Venezuela began to really experiment with nationalization in the 50s, nationalized the telephone company and other things, but it remained relatively free until 1980s or so. They really began to extend and expand things. As, of course, oil prices went up, they got more and more, quote, free money, and then expanded the government even more. And then after Chavez and now his successor have come in, there has just been massive expansions in state power. I mean, in the 1950s, government only ate up 20% of the GDP. Now, of course, it's far higher. And what has been the highly predictable and inevitable results of this expanded socialism in Venezuela? Well, hyperinflation. There are people rooting through garbage cans looking for things to eat. There are schools that barely have any supplies. There are hospitals with very few, if any, medicines and filth and disease. There are immense Soviet-style lines to buy basics, medicines, bread, flour, and so on. And there, of course, has been expanded state control over complaints, freedom of expression, all the usual hysterical tamping down on the geyser of indignation that arises when the inevitable economic consequences of the desire for the unearned manifest themselves. The cost of living has gone through the roof in recent years, and let's have a look at some numbers. So look at the salary earned by a full-time college professor. We'll call him Professor X, right? So in the 1980s, Professor X could buy 1 kilogram of beef with 15 minutes worth of his salary. Right? Professor X buys a kilogram of beef, 15 minutes of his salary. Now, in July 2017, now to buy 1 kilogram of beef, Professor X needs to work not just 15 minutes, but 18 hours. And I would assume, of course, 18 hours of work consumes more calories than you can obtain from a mere kilogram of beef, so it is a starvation spiral that is occurring here. Now, if you look at the 1980s, Professor X, to buy a new sedan, like a new car, he had to pay almost a year's salary. But now, if Professor X wants a new car, he has to pay 25 years' worth of his salary, and it's even worse since then. In the 1980s, his monthly salary, he could buy 17 basic baskets of essential goods. Now he can only buy 1/4 of one basic basket of goods. The currency, the lifeblood, the survivability of an urban environment, right? I mean, if people are living on the farm, they can consume a lot of what they produce themselves. But the moment you get excess food production, which requires a free market to create, to distribute, and to end up being in stores, you require price signals and free markets. In order to have cities, you need a free market. And what's happened, of course, is the excess food production that occurred as a result of the free market that allowed for the growth of the cities is being choked off because the government is increasingly destroying market incentives, even market possibilities to get food to people in cities who can't possibly sustain themselves. What you can buy, you get 3 pots of oregano on the windowsill, that's really not enough to live on. And so the cities, as they always do in these kinds of situations, are the first to die. So in March 2007, the biggest bill in Venezuela was the 100 Bolivar bill. Now, in 2007, with the 100 Bolivar bill, you could buy $28. You could buy 56 kilograms of rice or 288 eggs with your 100 Bolivar bill. Now, it's $0.01, 0.2 eggs, 0.08 kilograms of rice. And so in July 2017, and it's even worse now, I assume, instead of being able to buy 288 eggs with your 100 Bolivar bill, you needed 5 100 Bolivar bills to buy just 1 egg. To buy just 1 egg. People are suffering in ways that can scarcely be imagined in the more prosperous West. People are dying. People are starving. You have floods of middle-class women going over to Colombia to sell their bodies in prostitution just to get enough food for their families. You have people selling off their children. You have an absolutely staggering amount of suffering going on in Venezuela at the moment. It is a future and a presage of what happens when government continues to control the market, when the cities die, when the women turn from housewives to whores, when the children turn from joyful additions to your family to sell by the pound commodities on a very black market. This is the future that awaits us. And my question is, if sociopathy is associated with having no guilt, shame, or remorse over the evil results of your evil actions, what do we call the people who ignore the suffering in Venezuela today? I know what I would call them. So let's stop taking advice from them, okay?
Stepan Molyneux on YouTube. Check him out. Subscribe. Now, I got an article here, Wall Street Journal. Pressure builds on Venezuela with big payments due this week. More than $2 billion in bond payments are due over the next several days from oil-rich, cash-strapped country. Global investors have been bracing for a Venezuela default for years, but a period of reckoning could be coming with more than $2 billion in bond payments due over the next several days. State-owned oil company Petroles de Venezuela SA has $985 million in principal and interest due Friday, and another $1.2 billion due November 2nd. Venezuela has fallen behind on interest payments in recent months, though the stakes are much higher now. PDVSA and Venezuela made use of a 30-day grace period for those late interest payments, but the bulk of the money due this time is for principal bond payments that aren't subject to a grace period. That means failure to pay on time could enable investors to declare a default. According to bond documents, analysts say a Venezuelan default could create one of the largest and most complicated debt restructuring in history. Creditors include contractors with promissory notes, bondholders who were promised the assets of state-owned oil refinery Citgo Holdings, Inc. In the event of a default, Russian oil producer Rosneft and dozens of creditors with international disputes related to nationalized assets, all of whom are expected to scramble for limited assets. A default would also allow PDVSA bondholders to trigger cross-default provisions in nearly all the other PDVSA bonds, enabling them to push for full payment if holders of at least 25% of the debt vote to do so. According to bond documents, PDVSA has about $30 billion of debt outstanding that could be triggered by a default, according to Seaport Global Securities LLC, a brokerage that trades Venezuelan bonds. So really just all out not looking good for this Venezuelan socialist utopia that is no more. As we expect socialist countries to go. What's really sad is all the people that they're just citizens. They some of them want to try to do something. They're all in turmoil. It's a collapsed civilization. It'd basically be like if overnight here, just, toilet paper went up to, $100 a roll. Everything went up. You have to walk to go pay your $100 for your roll of toilet paper because you're not going to be able to drive. Just complete inflation to the max. And, of course, it fell just like the Soviet Union. Again, it's just really sad for the people there having to deal with all this. Okay. I want to move along. I'm trying to debate on how I want to take this next one on. I think I'm going to go ahead and get into a Ron Paul Liberty Report. I think I already played this one, but I really want to spend this last bit of time getting into the whole liberty movement, being, 10 years and stuff since the campaign for 2008 when the Ron Paul revolution really exploded, and all the enthusiasm and really the people coming together over the message, that Ron Paul was putting out. And this one covered the Giuliani moment in the debate where Ron Paul challenged Giuliani about 9/11 and the war in Iraq and all that. And even though he got booed in the audience, it really just, it spoke to people. And then people really kept looking into him. You know, by then I was already, you know, a Ron Paul supporter, but the more he spoke, the more enthused I got, because I also seen that others, you know, felt the same way. You know, back in 2006, you know, I really got heavily exposed to Ron Paul and ideas that he had and other, you know, libertarian type ideas. And it was just amazing how that grew. And it's so mind-blowing for me. I mean, mind-blowing for me to realize how much time has passed, you know. I started really kind of getting into, by 07, 08, I was really starting to get into the internet stuff when it came to the activism or the sharing of information, these ideas, connecting with others online, getting my website going up. And at that time, you know, there was a lot of inspiration. And I'm going to play this clip. And I have an article out of copblock.org that I really want to read, because I really think this is an important article. But first, I want to play this Ron Paul Liberty Report. We'll get into this. I think this is another important thing to cover. So it's really a now or never thing that we need to water the tree of liberty and really push to motivate that inner core of people that we've been around from the beginning. You know, whether it be cop blockers or oath keepers, it's so many groups that formed out of it. And it seems that we've been a little divided, a little uncertainty. And people have been asking lately, you know, what are you doing? What's your plans? And how are we going to move forward? And I've had some ideas, and I'm going to try to explore these ideas, because I think it needs to have that nostalgia and the same inertia that it had back then. So let's get into this Ron Paul Liberty Report, the Giuliani moment, 10 years on, what does it mean today? And he talks about, you know, the movement and all that in this clip. So let's go ahead and get to it.
Are you suggesting we invited the 9/11 attackers?
I'm suggesting that we listen to the people who attacked us and the reason they did it. And they are delighted that we're over there because Osama bin Laden has said, I am glad you're over on our sand because we can target you so much easier. They've already now, since that time, have killed 3,400 of our men, and I don't think it was necessary.
Wendell, may I make a comment on that?
That's really an extraordinary statement. It's an extraordinary statement of someone who lived through the attack of September 11th, that we invited the attack because we were attacking Iraq. I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for September 11th. And I would ask the congressman to withdraw that comment and tell us that he didn't really mean that.
Congressman?
I believe very sincerely that the CIA is correct when they teach and talk about blowback. When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists. And if we ignore that at our own risk. That if we think that we can do what we want around the world and not incite hatred, then we have a problem. They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there. I mean, what would we think if we were if other foreign countries were doing that to us?
Can I have 30 seconds, please?
No, wait a second. Let's all get 30 seconds.
They are coming.
We all want 30 seconds to talk about this. Wendell, go ahead.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, I understand that we have a slightly different type of program today, that you might have a few questions for me.
I do, and as anybody might guess that's tuned in, this week is really the 10th anniversary of that famous, infamous, whatever you want to call it, debate in South Carolina in 2007, GOP debate. Rudy Giuliani, the hero of 9/11, the front runner for the presidency in 2008, you dared to challenge him. He built his entire notoriety on 9/11. You dared to challenge him. And this is the famous clip, the Giuliani moment. Unfortunately, we didn't do the whole thing, but we did a good chunk of it. And I think a lot of people, look back on this and they wonder, how did you feel then? What did it feel like when you were standing there? What was going through your mind?
Well, I didn't have much time to think about feelings. I had only my thoughts about how am I going to answer the question. And I wasn't thinking about the audience. I wasn't thinking about the bigger audience outside. I was thinking about the question and what my job was, and that was to present a position which I knew was challenging. I guess during that episode, I guess it was at the time when there was tremendous applause, not for me, tremendous applause for Giuliani. I thought, well, it didn't say, oh, this is devastating. Oh, what did I get myself into? How am I going to get myself? None of that. It was just that this is routine. This is the way it works. You didn't expect, this crowd to be 100%. You came here to convert the crowd. I don't think it did too much converting of that crowd. But right afterwards, I can remember Kent Snyder, our friend that we've lost, who was the campaign manager, because he knew there was some stress on that, and the media was hounding me and all that. But he came up behind me and says, "Guess what, Ron? You're winning the polls on the TV." He wanted to settle me. I hadn't even thought about that yet, about the polls. But to me, it was challenging. I didn't realize the significance. I don't think anybody else knew the significance of it, because it was a confrontation that turned out to be couldn't have been planned. Giuliani couldn't have planned it. He didn't have any plans to help me get my message out. I couldn't have planned it. I couldn't have thought about my answer. I didn't know the question, but I did know the issue, and I felt confident. I've often said I've never been the best to give the magnificent speeches and all, but I do believe that the message is very powerful. And that, to me, was the important thing. And this gave me the chance, because you worked with me for so many years, and the war issue was a big issue. We worked so hard to try to stay out of Iraq and out of Afghanistan. And it was a big event. So this, to me, it turned out to be an opportunity. But I didn't think of it as being that big of an event, that it was that major. And it was just sort of, this is the way, our issues have been treated. With sort of low expectations. A lot of people ask me, don't you get tremendously discouraged? I said, really not. I just don't have these blown up expectations that I'm going to save the world. I think maybe my opponent that night had a blown up expectation of him becoming president. So that was, so the thoughts weren't, racing through as much as I got to stay on message.
And, in putting this into historical context is important, too, because this is 2007. We just had the 2006 midterm elections. A lot of the other Republicans who had voted against the war, there are only a handful of them, they'd been primaried out. I think Hostetler was primaried out. A few others were. And there was a big Democrat rush. But the Iraq war was still extremely popular among Republicans at that time. And here you walked onto a stage where a Republican who made his name, who made the front-runner status as a hawk, controlled the crowd. It didn't seem to faze you.
No, and 2008, even though some of the people who were against the war didn't do well politically, you take a Jimmy Duncan, a great friend, and he voted against it on basic principle, and he came from what I consider the old right. The Robert Taft position. He didn't think we should be involved. And yet, in 2008, it was a terrible year for the Republicans. Bush was a bad name, and he, of course, participated in. I think we lost the House at that time. It had to do with the war. So sentiments had shifted. But in the meantime, I can recall Jimmy Duncan when he told me, he said that was the toughest vote he ever cast. He dreaded the fact that he had to go home and face the music, and they did give him a lot of challenges, but he's really well known and respected in his district. But he said not too many years afterwards, he says, Ron, it was tough at the beginning, but he says, it's one of my most popular votes and the vote he was most proud of. And I thought, well, that was pretty neat that he stuck to his guns.
And he's never backed down, and he continues to get reelected, I'm sure, as long as he'd like to, because like you, he's a very straight shooter. He tells it like it is.
Right. And, I think people's ideas do change. I was always so pleased, and we still talk about our friend Walter Jones, because he voted for it. And he was representing a military district, and he thought, well, I'm in a military district, and they say you have to be pro-military and pro-war, or you're un-American. You blame America first, all that nonsense. And he finally, the crowning thing for him, he told me, was when I asked him, what got you to change a bit on this war issue? And he said it was my inability to believe my own government, because he went, and he was very serious about his job. He went to all the briefings and listened to the briefings, and it was all propaganda. You remember the propaganda, how they went to the UN and everything else trying to justify war. So when it dawned on him that he had been lied to, that's when he switched over and said that he's not going to trust the officials to come and tell us why we had to send these kids off to war. And it hasn't hurt him politically either.
It hasn't, but initially it was very bad. I remember seeing him walk down the halls, and Republicans would turn the other way. They'd turn their heads. Nobody would say hello to him. Nobody would talk to him. He was really ostracized because he was sort of the face of the pro-Iraq war movement. It takes an awful lot of courage to turn your back, but it hasn't worked out badly for him in the end. But, for a lot of us who were with you and working for you and everything, it was, and I think a lot of your followers, that was sort of a JFK moment. Where were you when Ron Paul did this? And I remember sitting in my living room watching it, and our instinct on your congressional staff was to always protect, you from bad publicity or what have you. And so I was worried with the Giuliani clapping, and I thought, what's going to happen? This is really frightening. And all of a sudden, I think a lot of us were surprised that, and I would take issue with people say this launched the movement. I don't think that's the case. But what this did, I think, is gave it a real energy drink and propelled it into the stratosphere.
No, and obviously, when I made my recommendations for the reading list for Giuliani, obviously my views came from reading and studying other people. It sort of reminds me about how I came about understanding and believing in Austrian economics. It wasn't, I would kid, I said, when I really got excited about Austrian economics is because I came to these conclusions. Then I discovered Austrian economics, and they agreed with me. But obviously, what had happened was I was influenced by their ideas, and I was talking their language. But no, people come before us, and ideas, spread like wildfires, and you don't know exactly where they come from. You read a lot of books from me, you don't know exactly, but they come together, and there is an influence. And I think that's what the Liberty Movement was all about, and I think the foreign policy. But I've said it so many times that it at times was pretty tough when we were trying to get votes on the House floor. And we believed the sentiment in the country was more in favor of ours. And we'd get 6 or 8 or 10 people and a few Democrats that were pro-war. And it's still a small group, but I still think the American people, are opposed to this nonsense. And I think one of the things that helped Trump was the fact that he decided to take a slightly different tone with Russia, and even Nixon, he took a different tone about the war. He was the anti-war candidate. He was going to end this stuff, and of course that didn't happen either. So very often, how about Johnson and Goldwater? They painted him. Goldwater was going to blow up the world with nuclear weapons. Such evil demagogues, in order to promote the constant war. That's how powerful the military-industrial complex is. And they have, of course, so much control in the media, and they do influence a lot of people. But I think that we're in better shape now than we were in the 2008 election. More people involved, more young people. Yes, the campuses are a mess now with what's going on with the professors and the administration promoting cultural Marxism, but there's still a nucleus people on campuses that know exactly what we're talking about, and they're pro-peace and they're pro-national defense in a positive way, and that is out there. And besides, I keep telling people it's not exactly the numbers. Yes, of course, that night, if you want to give me the benefit of the doubt and say I won that debate, but not for that audience. I would have gone about 3%. But it isn't the numbers. It's quality and outreach and how a message is spread. And if it's a positive and a popular viewpoint and it's expressed well, it will spread. They can't stop it. They can demagogue it. They can use political stunts. They can call you all kinds of names. But these views will spread, and I think they have. In these last 10 years since that happened, I think we still, the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, what you're doing, I don't think, let's say you had come to the office in 2002 and said, Ron, I've had a year's experience here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop out and we're going to start this institute. It wasn't ready. But now things are ready, and you're doing tremendous work with the Institute, and it's designed specifically to promote this issue, pro-peace, pro-national defense, where you can defend the country, but not sacrifice ourselves to all the other countries in the world. But you can see why, with the frustrations out there, why people would be tempted to fall in line with the president, because he throws out a little bit, and everybody... even those who knew they should be skeptical would say, well, maybe it'll be different this time. Well, right now we're starting to realize, unfortunately, that our opposition, which means the organized efforts who are always promoting war and who profit from war, they're still very, very powerful. But we have decided we have truth on our side. And I believe that our strength, the movement's strength, will continue to grow, and that one of these days we're going to wake up. The markets today are rocky for various reasons. Someday they're going to be more than just rocky, and things will have to change. The dollar's been weak in the last week, but not crashing. Someday the dollar will crash, and all of a sudden, even today, with minor changes, comparatively speaking changes, they say, oh, I guess the Fed's going to have to cancel their mischief for June and not lower the interest rates 0.25%. Like, it blew the whole thing. Well, yeah, an incident like this does alter things like that. So it's going to be, when the crisis gets bigger, believe me, there's going to be a lot of reassessment. I was quizzed today on TV that said, what about the markets? Will it be more difficult to get the Republican position passed? Because of the problems in Washington. Well, probably, but the real issue is the economy is in such a mess.
Yes, exactly. And 10 years on, the Ron Paul movement continues. There is no Giuliani movement. Giuliani turns out to be just another of the neocons who are still prominent. We don't have any illusions about that. They're still around, but we seem to be gaining momentum. Of course, there are stops and starts, but it continues. For my closing, if you'll indulge me to be slightly longer than usual, I have a JPEG with a picture that you didn't like that much when I showed it to you, but I like it, and I think our audience is going to like it. I just love this. This is from the American Conservative back in 2012, and it's a piece by Jim Antle. This is just as you were it's the end of 2012, just as you were about to leave office. And I'll read it quickly because I think it's a good summation. Jim writes, when Ron Paul leaves office in January, he will have been more successful than many of the legislators who spent decades maligning him. Paul's ideas have gradually gone from marginal to mainstream, and his record shows how much even a single determined man of principle can do to change a movement. In foreign policy especially, the Texas congressman leaves behind a new generation of leaders, both libertarian and conservative, who challenge the disastrous bipartisan consensus. That's a pretty nice summation. I have some slight quibbles, but I think it's pretty well done.
Very, very nice. And, all I was thinking about when you were reading that is that hope nobody thinks it's fake news. I hope they don't think it's propaganda. It sounded very honest, and, of course, people like to be complimented. So that is very nice.
And I would like to also say, thanks for, your comments about the Ron Paul Institute. We've been working together for a while now, and I think this really is the extension of what you did, the spirit of 2007, what we're doing to expand the idea of non-interventionism. And it does seem like our time has come. And, I would like to ask people if they would consider supporting the Ron Paul Institute. We produced the show, we co-produced the show. Your donations are completely tax deductible. You go to this website and help us continue doing what we're doing to grow the movement, to continue the movement. We've got a lot of big plans. We've got a lot of people to convert still, and we keep going on. So,
right. And I, too, would urge people to be supportive of the Institute. Daniel has done a great job, and we're making progress, but we obviously always need some help. And it's always tough, to get the finances of doing things like this. In particular, the opposition, the military-industrial complex. When you think of their lobbying groups in Washington, they spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbying and campaigning to make sure our message doesn't get heard. But there's every reason to believe that this is that we are making very nice progress. This has been, an interesting program to refresh our memory of what happened back then. As has been asked so often, were you pretty despondent about everything that was happening there? Not really. But I think the end has turned out very well. I think people remember it in a very positive fashion, and hopefully, that the simple process of knowing something, seeking truth, speak it clearly, and do your best to be consistent will pay off in the end. And it may pay off in a way that you don't even know. Sometimes, it just might happen that you spread a message and you never know where it goes. I never really expected the message I was delivering. It was somebody else's message that they may or may not remember what that I did. But it turned out that events put it together and we were able to reach a lot of people. And I see it as very positive. I want to thank all of you for the support over the years, for what I've tried to do and what you have done to help the liberty movement. This will continue to flourish, and I'm optimistic on the long run, in spite of the fact that there's a mess in Washington. But believe me, it's going to be an opening for us to promote the cause of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. Real important that you do that. We hope that Ron Paul continues to put these out as long as he can. I hope Rand Paul, his son, can really grab, and this is a lot to put on Rand Paul's shoulders. And I'm not trying to, say he needs to do this. If he's going to continue in politics and to be someone that was as highly respected as his father, he's going to need to stay humble and remember what Ron Paul has taught him throughout the years. And, he's going to have his own views on things. And I understand that. But, again, stay humble and remember, what Ron has taught you. I think that he can create his own story that reflects someone that might have flaws, but is respected, has stayed true to freedom and liberty and to those basic beliefs. And looking at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is those steps towards that freedom. A lot of people within this liberty movement have criticized Rand Paul for positions he's taken. And I understand that because, it doesn't really hold true, but we also seen how effective maybe, Ron Paul was, even though he continued to vote. He didn't make any progress with other people too often. Occasionally, you would get a few people that would, sign on to something with the Federal Reserve. And he finally got some of that rolling because a lot of times because of the people that, kept cheering him on. This liberty movement has really steamed down. I remember, when Oath Keepers came out. I remember when, the Free State Project was formed initially, before it became a full-fledged organization, when it was the idea. Campaign for Liberty. And how energized people were. And it wasn't even if he won, because even after the 2008 election, these people were still amped. They were viral. We had, YouTube was flooded with it. We Are Change, all these different, and people. Well, We Are Change. That's that 9/11. We Are Change, and Luke specifically did a lot to spread a lot of the ideas that Ron Paul had talked about with the Federal Reserve. And, he's been an investigative journalist that has looked into, these type of people, the kind of shadowy figures, the Soroses and, the Rockefellers. It's Rothschilds, it's one of those deals that where we do have differences in opinions and views on certain issues. But even within that, the ideas that Ron Paul, espoused, we had a lot of common, even if we were slightly different on maybe a couple issues. We were similar enough that we got along. We worked together. And, when I started my website and I really started getting it rolling, started, publishing articles, doing my own articles. I did a couple articles, helped with a couple articles on a couple other sites. It was one of those deals that I had people that, were well versed in Austrian economics and could really get down to the numbers. I had people that were the activist type that were out there that were, getting their hands dirty and, filming a lot of similar to, the cop block, but they were more just, freedom people, but they always found themselves, at a protest, and all of a sudden the police state comes in. Now they become journalists in more of a sense than, they were kind of filming and in a sense being a part of it. Luke Radowski, he was caught in some of that, protests in the police state. I have an article here, and I've been feeling this way lately, and after feeling this way for quite a while now, and then reading this article, I felt that this was something that was, for me at least, I hope for others, important, because if we don't have any ambition, and this was, part of, why I haven't really been able to expand on the website. You have websites out there that are more well-established libertarian views. It's a real tight competition now because of the ability to get the people that are really motivated, definitely at the grassroots, being at, my financial level of, when we grow this, there's more potential. In the liberty movement, the grassroots is harder and harder to get people out of. Definitely when that pool gets smaller and you have these bigger, websites, it's harder to get out of. But, I still have not given up. It's one of those deals. I believe we've hit a slump, but with all the communists and the fascists, alt-right, alt-left, all of this, I think right now the idea of freedom and libertarian ideas and small government, it has the ability to grab all these people that are going, I'm tired of the alt-left and the alt-right. I'm tired of it all. They're both talking nonsense. Where is the logic? Well, you have a lot of logic within small government, libertarian-minded people that aren't a part of what seems to be a, effort to bring down America in the sense that you divide them, you conquer them, and you enslave them. And that seems to be what's going on. And even if Trump is this nationalist that's trying to prevent the globalists from taking over, what he's we've seen what nationalism can do. It can isolate a country, and we could become, that third world that has all the sanctions on it. And that's where the threat really comes to play. And I'm not saying that's exactly where we're headed or nothing, but I'm saying be very cautious about what you allow in the name of protecting the nation state. Because in the end, when nationalism is achieved more at a government level than it is at just, people saying we're going to unite together, which isn't happening. So where's the nationalism? It's in government. It's different than, people within a nation say we're going to stand together and protect each other's rights, to a national government where it's saying we're going to protect the institution, even if it harms the people. And there's going to be pain. And we've talked about this for a long, long time. There's going to be pain because, again, we're still just printing money. Inflation is more than what they claim it is. But let me get to this article here, Cop Block. And this was posted 2 days ago. Okay. And this was posted by Ian Freeman. He said, "Hi, I'm Ian Freeman. I'm one of the original cop blockers." And then he has a picture posted here too, which is why I possess badge number 5. I've been a longtime cop blocker, financial supporter, and occasional blogger here. Both of Cop Block's founders, Pete Ear and Ademo Freeman, have lived with me in my home, and they are great friends with whom I've had amazing times. I was alarmed this summer when Ademo announced that he was putting copblock.org up for sale. I wasn't surprised that he wanted out. Ademo has seen his share of burnout and has suffered greatly in his quest to hold police accountable. And that's another thing, is the burnout. A lot of people that have been in my position, which, I've experienced it too, it is the burnout. We've been doing this for so long. And the universities have really been destroying the youth, where because universities at one point had a lot of intermingling of ideas, people might have looked at Marxism, but they also looked at, a lot of the more libertarian philosophers, and, von Mises and the Mises Institute was, doing pretty well. I'm not sure exactly how they're doing right now. I hope they're doing well still. But, it grew out of it even bigger than it already was. So burnout is another thing that we probably need to address at some point. It says here, Ademo was a trailblazer in police accountability activism and deserves as much of a break as he wants. He's currently describing himself as a happily retired activist, and he should be. Our world is better off because Cop Block is in it. What surprised me about his request to sell the site was the fact that Ademo felt he had to resort to sell at all. Where were all the cop blockers who should have stepped up to take the reins? Ademo had asked the primary contributors to the site about taking over lead roles. Apparently no one stepped up, so Ademo decided to auction the site. When I found this out, I asked around, and sure enough, while some people were willing to help, no one wanted to lead. Ultimately, someone made an offer on the site, and Ademo accepted. He said the buyer did not want to be known and that the buyer was going to continue the site. We are now approximately a quarter year from that purchase, and you can see the posts on the site have dropped off a cliff. Regular posting halted at the end of July, and nothing was posted until September 1st, when an account with the username CopBlock posted about the most reported on police abuse story of the year, the Utah nurse who was violently arrested by a hothead cop, who now thinks he should have his job back, by the way. The post has one sentence and the video of the rest. That's it. Gone are the obscure, outrageous stories of police abuse from around the U.S. and globe. Gone is the incisive libertarian commentary on the police state. Gone are new videos from cop blockers in the streets. I have no idea who the new owner is, and while I am grateful for still being able to post here, I've lost my admin privileges, so I can't look to see who else remains as a blogger. The site also needs some basic maintenance that appears to have been neglected this far. So what happened? How did CopBlock, the world's most popular and effective police accountability website and group of activists, end up on life support? As someone who has been around CopBlock from before it began and who lives in the city where CopBlock was incubated, Keene, New Hampshire, I think I'm qualified to speak on the matter. So let's start at the beginning. CopBlock started after Pete and Demo's previous project, Motorhome Diaries. They were traveling the country looking for freedom in America. Like many of us seeking freedom, it was ironically taken from them by the men with the uniforms and badges in a place called Jones County, Mississippi. CopBlock began as a result of Ademo and Pete's desire to encourage people to use cameras to hold police accountable, to know and exercise their rights, and help our neighbors under police threat. The same year as CopBlock's founding, they again set out on the road for Liberty on tour and subsequent CopBlock tours. They travel from city to city, meeting with police accountability activists across the United States and hitting the streets in classic CopBlock style, inevitably getting charged and threatened by police in countless ridiculous circumstances. CopBlock grew dramatically as a result. People were emboldened by the excellent example set by the original CopBlockers. Local chapters were formed around the globe. Many submitted their video and blog content to the site, and the number of contributors increased. It was with this growth that things started to go wrong. Even among people who share similar views, groups that grow to a certain size have a tendency to schism. CopBlock was no exception. While the site started from a principled libertarian viewpoint, as the contributors expanded, people became involved who just hate police and didn't necessarily share the pro-freedom views of the site's founders. It's good that the message of police accountability reaches a wider audience than just libertarians. That's why CopBlock was far more successful than other libertarian efforts in its time. However, it was a major error to allow non-libertarian blogging ability on the site and CopBlock's social media. It's understandable why no one would do it to get more content from people willing to provide it. Unfortunately, ultimately undermined what was principled pro-liberty message of the original CopBlockers. We all make mistakes in life and learn from them. It's a constant growing process. Ademo realized his error a few years ago and came out of then semi-retirement to once again take the reins of control of the decentralized organization he created. I can hear some people reading this saying to themselves, so so much for decentralized, he kicked active contributors out. To clarify, Cop Block was decentralized in that anyone could cop block or form a local group somewhere, and the main organization would say you can't, or wouldn't say you can't do that. It's always been that way. However, running the main website always has to be centralized to some extent. Someone's got to be the administrator and make administrative decisions. In this case, the demo removed a bunch of bloggers and brought it back to a solid core of principled cop blockers running things. Activism is expensive and there's not much money to be made. Cop Block had sold some killer gear in the website store and on their real-life tours. They were able to use the site's immense popularity to pay their web hosting bills, but the amount coming in each month was paltry. Running Cop Block was a labor of love. With subsequent arrests and aborted Cop Block tour, very low revenue for the Cop Block network, an interesting idea with enough support could have helped people providing pro-level police accountability services to get paid for their efforts. And that was in parentheses. And other parts of life calling out to him, Ademo finally threw in the towel after a final arrest for cannabis possession earlier this year. What he created with Cop Block has done so much to educate and embolden people across the planet. I hope he enjoys his retirement. Being in the spotlight can be tiresome, and I don't blame anyone for wanting to move on to other things. However, Demo's personal story and the rise and fall of copblock.org aren't necessarily the reason why other cop block groups have died out. According to one New Hampshire cop blocker who audited the copblock.org list of local groups, most were completely dead, and those that remained were only one or two people strong. Every group surely has its own story, but I'd be willing to bet personality conflicts played a role, as well as activist burnout. Burnout is a real thing. It's common among all activists. It happens when people don't get the results they imagine as quickly as they imagine. Being aware that burnout exists won't necessarily save you from it. We see it all the time here in the Libertarian Activist Center of the world, New Hampshire. Despite having the largest concentration of libertarian activists you can find anywhere, people still get burned out by the slow pace of change that we are successfully fomenting here. Some of them think that they can come up here, do some activism, and then that the police state is just going to disappear. It's a big police state out there, and they aren't going to let go of power easily. I can relate to the burnout activists like Ademo. I've also been arrested more than half a dozen times for various civil disobedience. As victimless crime spree star Derek J. Freeman and I discussed in our recent Q&A, civil disobedience, while personally empowering, is not a sustainable form of activism. I don't regret my arrest, but with all my other responsibilities I've had to mellow out over the years and make room for new activists to take the reins. Unfortunately, the new activists coming to New Hampshire willing to take such risks are slowed to a trickle, or have slowed to a trickle, and they were never that many to begin with. In the victimless crime spree days 5 years ago, we truly had the perfect storm of activists in the same place. Think about this. This type of movement started. I'm kind of off article now. This kind of movement started, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, even me myself was very enthused. I mean, I was emboldened. I was empowered. There was enthusiasm, and that's trickled. And I even try to say that I play a fault because of, people said I did a lot of doomsday, everything's coming to an end. I stand by what I say that, things, these bubbles are being created and they're pop, but when you're aware of it, it helps to, when you try to stay out of it, you realize the bubble's being created, you make a lot of money and you get out of it before that bubble bursts. You benefit from it then. But, just being aware of these things is not, I'm not trying to fear monger and, scare people away either. There's great things that we've accomplished and we need to continue that. And that's why I had to bring this article up. But it says here, back to the article, we truly had the perfect storm of activists in the same place. Police accountability activism has died down here in New Hampshire, the place where some of the most epic cop blocking has happened, including dozens attending DUI checkpoints in Manchester, chalking arrests outside the Manch police station, smoking pot inside the Keene police department, and awesome civil disobedience in Keene. I could go on and on. Sadly, a long-time cop blocker in Manchester told me today the turnout at a recent DUI checkpoint was dismal, despite dozens being made aware of the event just hours beforehand during a speaking event by Adam Kokesh. Says here, is your cop block group still alive? If so, tell us in the comments. If not, please post your comment about what happened and what went wrong. One thing that definitely helps activists keep going and avoid burnout is for new blood and therefore new ideas to come in a group. Cop block groups in most places were very small. Not many people have the courage to confront police in any way. So, of course, the pool of potential volunteers is quite thin. But those who do step up, because they are frequently alone and only with a small group, arrests inevitably come, and then the burnout. It's hard to make an impact with a small group, though you can certainly still help many individuals in the process of cop blocking. So it is rewarding. That said, social interaction with other activists helps stave off burnout, and many groups just didn't have the numbers. As we've learned here from some of the epic disobedience and police accountability work performed by the activists in Keene, New Hampshire, numbers matter. To anyone out there who feels alone in your police accountability activism, if you are a libertarian-minded cop blocker, you really need to consider a move to New Hampshire. There's the link, 101 reasons why you'll love it here. Divided, we will surely fall to the evil forces of the state. Staying where you are and standing alone or nearly alone is a recipe for failure. Joining together in the same geographic area with people who share your values and interests in the police accountability is the solution to the problems this organization has been suffering. Unfortunately, Pete and Adema are both gone from New Hampshire, and we are all worse off because of it. Pete's somewhere out west, and Adema's facing trial in Ohio. Leaving New Hampshire made them both less effective activists because they lacked their support network they had here. Their leaving made the movement in New Hampshire weaker, too. Nonetheless, some of us here in Keene are still pushing ahead without them, including continued yearly Know Your Rights outreach in the college neighborhood, DUI checkpoint interdiction, and old school cop blocking. Still, our numbers are small. We need more people to move here. We care about actually being successful and increasing liberty in our lifetime, as well as holding police accountable on video. You're not going to end the police state by yourself. They are just going to cut your head off if you pop it up. Come to New Hampshire and stand with others peacefully and use your cameras to shine light on the corruption and violence of the state. Whatever becomes of copblock.org, know that your brothers and sisters are in the Shire, and we could use your help. Should you wish to connect with some of us online, please drop into our brand new New Hampshire Cop Block forum here. If you would like to follow some other cool activism happening in New Hampshire, please subscribe to or bookmark our main blog site, Free Keene, where you'll see Cop Block founders Pete and Nadim are still both bloggers, though not really active anymore. And you can find him, Keene Cop Block and Free Keene. This really kind of struck home to me, and we've lost a lot of people in the movement. We've had a real division. And I'm not going to point fingers. There are people out there that take blame, but I also take blame on myself. I feel I could have done more. I feel that a lot of us could have done more. But a lot of us that did more, me, myself, I put tons of money into doing a lot of what I've done. I mean, tons of money. And talk about burnout, you put all this money into it, then you literally see people going, I can't do it no more, or I decide not to do it. I just need to, do my 9 to 5, and, I got a family now. I got more kids, and a lot of rest and a lot of activism that, cause problems, a lot of arguments within it, and people just dropping off. And it became, I think, a lot because everybody wanted to then become a star. They wanted, and I was never that way. I was like, I want to make a difference. And really, what I was trying to do was give these libertarian and constitutionalist minded people a platform that, we could create a news, organization that will have different views and create a platform. We had some that kind of went more towards a semi-mainstream foreign-owned company, and since have went full freedom libertarian type. And all this is cool and everything, but that was one of the points I was trying to make of my website initially, and it could have grown into something else. And if it would have got, bigger than me, awesome. If I could have handed the reins off, because, I do want a life too. And I wasn't trying to, my intent wasn't to create a career. I wanted to grow it and create something that could outlast me within that. And, I have other business ambitions. I didn't want to long-term be, I didn't want to be a media outlet tycoon, and I really never wanted it to become something where it was making, Fox News money. It was something where grassroots, initial, minded libertarian people were able to come. And I expected people to be able to grow beyond the site itself too. Be that opening, like Mises Institute is for young people, wanting to learn economics and stuff. course. I mean, they're not going to teach at a, mainstream college. But, we have to water that tree of liberty again. We need to, because we see what the colleges are doing. And when there was more free thought, that's what made them mad. And I think that's what caused the college environment we have now. Because they were mad that they didn't have control of all these young college students that were talking about Ron Paul, and they were out there pushing for more freedom and not safe spaces, and can't wear this, the communistic, Marxist attitude, fascist attitude too. That's not what these groups were talking about. So, if you have any ideas, you can contact me. If you're on ucy.tv/ATN, there's a contact tab. You'll see it up there. And, if you have ideas of what we can do, new technology, new ways of spreading the message, and also bringing in younger people. And I've already had one person bring up animation, and if anybody remembers the animated Ron Paul commercial that was made, if you haven't, just type in animated Ron Paul on YouTube, you'll find it. That's one good idea. I think there's a lot of good ideas out there, but email me, let me know what you think. There's also a contact form on anti-tyrannynews.com. I really want to try and find people to work with. I think we need, what Ron Paul is doing is great, and we need to do more of this. The talk radio is great. It's booming right now. TV sucks. Streaming's doing it. I've finally gotten in a position where my personal life is getting a little bit more cleared. So I want to really start working with people on ideas of growing the liberty movement once again. We need to keep these ideas and messages, fresh in the lexicon. I do want to play something. This from We Are Change, since some of the JFK files have been revealed. Some are still being blocked by, CIA and FBI. I wonder why. Who knows? But I'm going to play this clip here from We Are Change before the end of the broadcast. So let's get into it.
Jason Burmis here, reporting for wearechange.org. And this week, there's been a lot of media attention surrounding Donald Trump saying he will finally allow the infamous JFK assassination documents to be declassified. Now, there have been a number of times in the past that these documents were finally supposed to come to light. So a lot of people are treating this like a big deal. However, I got to tell you, folks, although I'm somewhat anticipating them, I kind of already know what's in them. The reason is that a document was made available to the public in the early 2000s, and it was even included in my 2010 documentary, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined. So what is this document, and why is it so important? Well, first of all, it's a document that's dated March 3rd, 1964. And it's a correspondence between the chief of the U.S. Secret Service, James O'Reilly, receiving from John McCone, the director at the time of the Central Intelligence Agency. And really the only way to do this document justice is to read it in its entirety, taking pauses to point things out momentarily. In response to the request made by your office on the 24th of February, 1964, a response to Lee Oswald's activities and assignments on behalf of this agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, aka on behalf of his involvement with the CIA and the FBI. There follows a narrative summary of the internal subversive actions of the Oswald subject. I recommend that unless the Commission makes a specific request for specific information contained herein, that this information not be volunteered. This agency has reason to assume that some junior Commission staff members may be potential sources of leaks to the news media or to other agencies. Due to the highly sensitive nature of the enclosed material, it would certainly be in the national interest to withhold it at this time, unless there is, of course, a specific request made. It is my understanding that Mr. Hoover has certain sensitive information within his agency which he transferred to his own personal files for safekeeping. He concurs that no material should be voluntarily given to the Commission which might affect the status of field operatives or their safety. So basically right here, folks, they're saying they're not going to share this information with the Warren Commission. He is particularly concerned about the DeBruy Memorandum, which Central Intelligence has obtained and which, I understand, you have obtained. It is imperative that this information, at least for the time, remain under wraps. So what is the DeBruy Memorandum? Well, the fact is that no such memorandum has been declassified to the public. But let me give you a little background on who wrote this memorandum. Warren C. DeBruy was born December 26, 1920. He served in New Orleans and L.A. and in Mexico City from 1943 to 1944 as a special employee in the FBI's counterintelligence role, including matters related to clandestine German microdot communications. He was instrumental in Dallas during the Kennedy assassination investigation, where he also directed the overnight analysis, composition, and assembling of the first report consisting of 800-plus pages. So, folks, if all the documents relating to JFK are actually declassified, we should see this 800-page report by Warren C. DeBruy. DeBruy has since passed away in 2013 at the age of 92 years old. Continuing with the document, the Oswald subject was trained by this agency under the cover of the Office of Naval Intelligence for Soviet assignments. So right there, the director of the CIA is admitting that Oswald was trained by the CIA under the cover of ONI. During preliminary training in 1957, the subject was active in aerial reconnaissance of mainland China and maintained a security clearance up to the confidential level. His military records during this period are open to your agency, and I have directed them to be forwarded to the Commission. The subject received additional indoctrination at our own Camp Peary site from September 8th to October 17th, 1958, and participated in a few relatively minor assignments until arrangements were made for his entry into the Soviet Union in September of 1959. While in the Soviet Union, he was on special assignment in the area of Minsk. It would not be advantageous at this time to divulge the specifics of that assignment. However, if you wish this information, it can be made available for your personal inspection within the confines of your own office. Or I can send it by courier on the condition that it not leave the custody of the courier. Now here comes a bombshell piece of this document. A bombshell piece of this document. I am concerned that this information were in any way disclosed to the wrong persons, it would lead the media to erroneously claim this agency and perhaps others were directly involved in the Dallas action. While the persons involved were in the employ of this agency, as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, it is virtually impossible for this or any agency to maintain full 24-hour-a-day responsibility over its operatives. So right there, McCone is admitting that the assassination indeed involved operatives within both the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the Central Intelligence Agency. It's right there in black and white, folks. At the time of the Dallas action, the Oswald subject was only seldom in our employ after the Soviet assignment. We found him to be unreliable and emotionally unstable. He was of little use to us after his marriage, and De Bruy, from what I understand, concurred in this. He was provided with a few unimportant infiltration assignments and proved of little or no value. It is possible that Oswald, given his instability, might have been involved in some operation involving Hoffa, as noted in Special Agent in Charge Bertram's report to your agency dated 1/3/64. Mr. Hoover advises that his agency is trying to determine whether Hoffa might have been involved laterally or vertically with the Dallas assassination. I have advised that I would be interested in seeing the results of that investigation. In Special Agent in Charge Bertram's 1/3/64 report are basically correct. His agency has advised Deputy Sweet against any further unauthorized statements to the news media which might adversely affect the investigation. Mr. Hoover advises he has no knowledge of how Deputy Sweet obtained his information, and there is no record of the agency distributing any such information to Sweat or any other member of the Dallas Sheriff's Office. It is regrettable that this information has come to the attention of the news media, but I am sure Mr. Hoover will be able to clarify the situation. Speculation within this agency, and this is only speculation at this point, is that Oswald subject may have become unstable following surgery April 1st, 1961 in the Minsk hospital. He may have been chemically or electronically controlled, a sleeper agent. The subject spent 11 days hospitalized for a minor ailment, which should have required no more than 3 days hospitalization at most. 6 days after his release, he met Marina Pruskova. This agency is particularly interested in her intelligence background, and I have requested a report from our Soviet embassy contact. So here, McCone actually talks about Oswald possibly being under mind control, whether or not it's this rogue element in the FBI and the CIA that he says carried out the attack, or whether it's Russian agents is really unclear. But it's pretty stunning that this is in the actual documentation between the director of the CIA and the head of the Secret Service. After his return to the U.S., Oswald worked in New Orleans through the Anti-Communist League of the Caribbean and Friends Democratic Cuba. His case officer was Special Agent in Charge Guy Bannister from the Chicago F131 office. He was transferred from his assignments thereafter. He was arrested and fined stemming from an incident of his distribution of pamphlets for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. While our files show no further assignments or contact, I am requesting a check on the subject from our New Orleans and Fort Worth offices. Please direct any further communication on this matter to my personal attention so that your request will be expedited, or feel free to call me anytime. My office is always available to you. John McCone. So there you have it, folks. A bombshell document that shows Oswald was trained by the CIA, worked with the FBI, that he admits, the director of the CIA at the time admits that it was carried out by rogue elements of both agencies, and he even alludes to MK Ultra style attacks by Oswald as a puppet.
Thank you all for tuning in. WeAreChange.org. Check them out.